Well, it says that we're live, so I'm going to trust that it is, and I'll wait for a confirmation once this pops up. But I wanted to, let me mute that. Perfect. So we are live. Very good to have you here. I want to introduce to you, everybody. This is Joseph Lumpkin. He is far more than just an author. There's a lot going on inside this man's mind, and he's been around and has an amazing background. So first and foremost, I just want to make sure that we allow people here to flow into the room so they can get a little bit of your introduction. And in doing so, I'll say hello to some folks. We've got Divine Renegade. These are some of the regulars. Stool Purger, I believe. Matthew Foudy, Curtis Lee. Good to see everybody here flowing into the room. So I'll just give a little bit of an introduction as far as Joseph Lumpkin to me, so you know before he introduces himself. I've read a number of his books, and his insight matched, in many ways, people have come to me and said, you've said exactly what I thought. Well, Joseph has written exactly what I thought. So with that, I'll let Joseph give a little bit of an introduction as to who he is, where he comes from, and he's quite humble and bashful. So I'll fill in some gaps if he doesn't give his full qualifications. So thank you for coming, Joseph, and just give everybody a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me. My background started with my grandfather, who was a Baptist preacher, and I sat under his knee for many, many years and ended up getting a degree in ministry and theology. But they said you can't make any money that way. So I ended up as an analyst for the Hypersonic Missile Technology Project in Huntsville, Alabama. So if y'all can detect an accent, that's where it's coming from. Raised in Indianapolis, but I've been down here for about 30 years. And as I was getting my degree, I was actually working for the government, and I ran across one simple line in Jude. Now, let me start by saying that when you get a seminary degree, you're indoctrinated, not necessarily educated. But they do give you tools for education. You have to use them. They'll tell you how to research, and as an analyst, I already knew, but so there you go. So I'm studying Jude, getting ready for my doctoral dissertation, run across one little line that says, "See first Enoch." And it was that line that says he'll come back with 10,000 of his saints. And I said, well, what's first Enoch? And so I went looking for it, and I found a couple of copies of the translation, and they were horrible. And I came back and said to my wife, Lynn, I think I can do better than this. So that's what I ended up doing as my doctoral dissertation. And I thought, well, it's already done. Let's see if someone wants to read it. And it went to number 300 on Amazon. Of course, that was just a little blurb. You know how that goes. It just peaks and comes back down.
Sure.
But after we did the first, second, and third book of Enoch, it has stayed as a bestseller in some category on Amazon for about 5 or 6 years, which I look around and think I was there and it happened. I didn't really have much to do with it, but that started me down the rabbit hole. And so that was in the early 2000s, and I've been going ever since. So there you go.
Well, I think we had talked about earlier that you got a little bit of a spike, and was wondering, why the book spiked and where did all those new sales come from? It was like, because I'm holding the book up and constantly. By the way, I don't think I showed this to you, but Joseph, this is one of I ended up having it because they fell apart because they were shared so much. Long story short, I ended up incarcerated. I think we discussed that for something that really wasn't illegal, but I spent most of my time reading through this and then handing it out, and everybody that read it, there was a schedule, and they would sign it and put their prison number in it. And this was the last book that I had because they kept falling apart. You see, that's why I have some tape holding the binding together, and then inside you, I don't know if you can see that, but there's Jim Passmore, and you got his CDC number, and his nickname of Zaz. And the crazy part is not many people know this, but because I would teach and talk to people about Enoch, that was my name in prison. So that's why it says Enoch. Everybody gives you a nickname. So my nickname, nobody knows my first name. They just all know me as Enoch.
Very cool. I'll have to send you another copy. Okay.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. So yeah, so there are. I can promise you, there's at a minimum 4 of these making their way around some prisons in this country. So they're far more open-minded behind those walls.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So this in putting this together, if you just quickly, because there's a bunch of things that we definitely want to talk about, because I want to we spoke about you being a ham radio operator, and that's incredibly interesting and things that definitely my subscribers will understand, and particularly other channels that we work with, like Leak Project and Oppenheimer Ranch Project, which discuss the grand solar minimum and all sorts of other things that are taking place right now, both cosmically and ecologically. And so I think that that's going to definitely be interesting in the Axial Age. But first, because people are primarily, there's quite a few of my subscribers that have just started reading this. So if you could just give a little bit of background as to what startled you or what shocked you the most about what you learned during your translation, your writing of the Book of Enoch, and including 2 and 3 Enoch.
Well, first, what shocked me was it's not in our scriptures. And but it is in the Ethiopic Church of Scriptures, and that's another story altogether. It's our 66 books. I was labeled a heretic by a couple of the people out there in internet land, because I suggested that since Enoch and Jubilees were included in the Ethiopic Church's canon, that and they were older, far older than the Protestant canon, that I wasn't about to say that they were wrong. As a matter of fact, I think that God did not say less and less as time went on. I think he articulated more and more as time went on, and we just culled what we didn't appreciate or didn't want. So you have in the book of Enoch our central angelology and demonology. And it informs the Old and New Testament. It's quoted word for word out of Jude. Peter references it. Jesus references it. And so you have books that are quoted by the Bible that aren't in the Bible by people who are guiding Christianity. And that was the most shocking thing. The other thing is the idea of, we've got things kind of mixed up as far as the Nephilim goes. So we have the Watchers, and they were supposed to be so evil. Well, they came down, and they didn't leave. They stayed and they raised their children. And that's something that people just kind of overlook. They raised their kids, and they apparently stayed with their women, whatever that meant. Monogamy or polygamy, I don't know, but because of the scriptures say that they chose whoever they wanted in the book of Jasher. Mm-hmm. So you have this picture that forms of these angels that came down, led by Shamyaza, and you have Azazel or Azazel that gives knowledge to the people of earth that we're not ready for yet, and God is very, very angry about that. Part of that knowledge, according to the book of Jasher, is that they taught us how to mix animal species. So not only were we looking at gene splicing going on, we were also looking at the fact that the book of Jubilees and Jasher informs us that there were actually 3 different species that came out of the union, the giants, the Nephilim, and the Elyo. And the only translation we can figure out with Elyo is godling. So we think possibly these Elyo were the men of renown that Genesis speaks of. So all of that, when it opened me up to this knowledge, was just like overwhelming. The things that Christianity does not teach you, but mentions and never goes into detail, because they have no detail, because they threw the book out.
Yeah, they threw the book out. And, it's amazing that the Ethiopic Christians still maintain that as part of their canon. And just the idea of canon in considering what you said is God never stopped talking. That's clear. God doesn't stop talking. If the word, if you follow the scriptures, you understand what Christ said. If if in the beginning was the Word and the Word was with God and the Word was God, and they say, well, that's the Son, and Jesus himself said that we're all sons, well, then the Word is continuously being written even right now as we speak.
Yes.
So it's you can't get away from the Akashic record, right?
Exactly,
The reality
yes.
is everything is recorded. Every single thing is recorded, even your thoughts, folks, just to, clue you in. This is a far more complex system.
If the Pentecostal church really believed what it said, and I can say this because I've been through that denomination also, they would be writing down all the prophecies that these people give. Mm-hmm. Because those would be holy utterances if they're actually prophesying. It is no different than Habakkuk or any of the other prophets. It needs to be written down, kept someplace, and referenced if it is a true word, because prophecy is prophecy.
And prophecy doesn't become prophecy until it's actually fulfilled and it was spoken, prior to the case.
Right.
So this is where people actually also neglect in the New Testament when you're reading the Gospel of John, and it says the high priest that year was prophesying because he was the high priest, and he said, don't you know it's better for one man to die than the whole nation? Mm-hmm. And that we will use this man's death as something to bring all the children of God together again. Well, if you're considering who Jesus was talking to and who he was admonishing and saying that their father was Satan, apparently that God bringing all the children into one wasn't necessarily the same one that Jesus was talking about. Otherwise, he would have specified that.
That's a great jumping off point. Can I do a riff just a moment?
You sure can.
Okay. So get my thoughts together. 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged from a cross-pollination of different species. And then about 8,000 years ago, we began civilization and agriculture. And then we have the sons of Adam going down to Enoch. Well, before Enoch, there was Jared. And Jared lived about 3,500 BC. And in his day, the Watchers came down. Okay. So up until that point, and up until the Axial Age, which is about 800 BC, every religion in the world was external. We all cared about sacrifices. We cared about pleasing God. We tried our best to figure out what he wanted. And so religion does not stand on its own. It is an evolutionary process. It's a cross-pollination. So here we are. We've got the god El coming out of Canaan, a Canaanite god of war, represented by a bull. He probably is the same as Simyaza, the head angel. We say this because they had a pantheon. There was Baal and Hadad and Mok and Yahweh. And in the scriptures, it says that God, El, portioned the land and gave them to his son, and Israel fell in Yahweh's venue. So we have the Canaanite God dividing the land to his sons, and Yahweh takes his place in Israel. That's why when you start the scriptures off, everything is El, but by the time you get to Abraham, for the first time at Abraham's hand, or whoever wrote it, because we know that there's at least 5 people who wrote the Pentateuch.
Yep.
The redactor tends to say or put together the Lord God. And for the first time, you have this kind of concatenation of El and Yahweh. And then things become kind of interesting, because if you look at Genesis 6 under that venue, the number of people increased on all the earth. The daughters were born of them. And the sons of Elohim saw the daughters of other humans, that they were beautiful. And so they married them, whoever they chose. Then Yahweh said, my spirit won't struggle with man forever. You know, his life is going to be 120 years. Mm-hmm. The Nephilim was on the earth at that time as well as later. And your people should probably underline as well as later, because that's obvious line that says they were here and then they were here after the flood, because you can't kill spiritual beings.
Yes.
So the Nephilim were on the earth in those days as well as later, and the sons of Elohim slept with the daughters of humans, and they had children by them. Then Yahweh saw that the humans were evil and had come upon the earth, and Yahweh was sorry that he had made them on the earth, and Yahweh said, I will wipe them from the face. So we have this problem in the scriptures, because we actually have the thoughts and deeds of two separate deities, it looks like. And you run into these complications, like, for example, original sin.
Mm-hmm.
The Orthodox Church doesn't even believe in original sin. Actually, neither do I. We have a propensity to sin, but we're not born sinners, because we are told that the sins of the Father can't be counted on the Son. So we have this whole process that we've convoluted. Elohim seems to be a rather warlike God, because that's where he was from. Yahweh seems to be a rather a merciful God. And I'm not absolutely convinced that the God who controls the elements of this earth, and what I mean by that is the archons, whether you want to call him Yaldabaoth or El or whatever, I am not absolutely sure that this God is the one true creator God. So there you go. Now I'm going to be classified as a gnostic, and
No, that's perfectly fine. Look, we're called everything here from gnostic. The amazing part is, I think the main thing that I get told is I'm a gnostic Luciferian, which to me is kind of like saying, it's an oxymoron. It just doesn't make sense, because the Gnosis and Luciferianism are two quite different. But the ironic part is that we have, and I believe, Joseph, that giving us the inability to actually speak truth is exactly that. These labels, the mere fact that, and I've already experienced this, being able to talk about a specific belief within a sect of people, you're automatically called anti-Semitic, because you're talking about the Talmud as opposed to the Torah. Mm-hmm. So as long as I'm talking about somebody that reads the Talmud, which is going to be Jewish people, I'm going to be anti-Semitic, even though I'm Jewish. So it's remarkable. You just have to be very, very comfortable being called names. I mean, that's what Christ promised. So I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Well, it's not that I don't believe in God. I certainly do. I am, after all, raised that way, and I probably will die that way. But what I am saying is, when you put a name on it, in this case, El, and that it was a Canaanite god, and that it evolved into a Jewish god because they broke away, and that Yahweh was first mentioned in a mining community, that the Canaanites had taken over in Egypt, and that Yahweh was probably their god of mining and weaving and dyeing and all of those traits. And then he spreads, and then you have this concatenation between the two. And then you can follow this in scripture. My beef, I suppose, you label something, it's not God. If you can think it, if you can experience it, it's not God. It is a one-off.
That's what the ineffable name means. It's ineffable, folks. Mm-hmm. There isn't anything that you could say in this three-dimensional space, in our third density here, anything that we could say or any name given or granted to something that is capable of creating everything would be a diminishing statement.
Yeah, that theology of negativity like that is called antithetical. Mm-hmm. But in any case, if we can experience it, it is an emanation, but it's not God. Mm-hmm. So if we can cut off everything, and it sounds rather Buddhist, but if we can stop everything, then that that cloud of unknowing because that's where that book came from. That cloud of unknowing is us knocking at the door of God.
Yeah, it's all in the terms. Somebody was just asking me today. The knowing. Let's go to that for a second, because I believe that's going to help. The tree of good and evil, and the tree. Malia has said, she's the one that famously within my videos has said this to me a number of times, and I've repeated it. Is that she said, look, folks, in the garden, there's only two trees. There's one of life and there's one of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. And knowing what that means provides an understanding about what the middle way or the narrow gate would be in between both of those, that somehow there's no possible way for us to actually know the difference between good or evil. And that's what I've said to many pastors. I go to them and I say, do you know the difference between good or evil? And they say, of course I do. And I go, really? So you mean the original liar, the father of the lie, the very first biblical debut, his debut, where he showed up on stage for the very first time and he said, eat this and you'll know, you'll be like God, knowing the difference between good or evil, that he told the truth on his biblical debut. I have a hard time thinking that would be the case.
Yeah.
And it opens up a whole new understanding of thinking that we believe we do. And considering what you and I were talking about earlier, is that if you could give a little bit on that somebody had told you, I can't recall who you had said it, that, or where you had read that, but the final sin basically that we would accept would be what?
Well, yeah, a doctor friend of mine and I were talking not long ago, and he said the final sin that we will accept before the return or the end or whatever would be pedophilia. We had gone through all other sins, bestiality, you can, whatever, and all of these convoluted sins. And he said the last one will be pedophilia. And why? Well, because it takes a special type of sociopathy and narcissism to do that to a child without conscience. Mm-hmm. And after the conscience is completely expunged from the majority of us, then there is no more compass. There's no moral compass.
There is no moral compass. Yes, and the mere fact that one of the other things Malia and I discuss often is that we can't mandate morality, right? A law doesn't establish morals in people.
No.
Obviously, if the law established morals, we wouldn't have the things going on. And I just quickly showed a headline while you were talking there of a news article from News Punch that shows a top Disney executive was arrested for operating a pedophile ring out of Disney, Orlando's Disney World. And they're trying
place.
What's that? Yeah.
What better place?
Yeah. And over 35 employees were arrested, and they're saying, what? That's just a little tiny subgroup. It's not like this is an epidemic within our company, but it's like 35 people is a lot.
Well, I would say that's a subgroup. We don't know how many are in the main group. That's the way that I would approach it. But that comes from my background as a bondsman and a coroner. So, can we get back to the Watchers and the fallen ones?
Yes, I definitely want it, because I have a specific question about the separation of the Watchers, the fallen ones, and Enoch, and why is he different from all of those, just to give people that don't know anything about Enoch or anything about the book a little bit of better understanding as to who Enoch is from a biblical perspective and who these other folks were.
Okay, so the Watchers came down. Let me go back to our scriptures, because I always like to tie it into what people know.
Sure.
Habakkuk 3, God came from Teman. Teman means in the south. So God came from the south, and the Holy One from Mount Paran. There's a wonderful article by Bryant Wood, PhD, in Shiloh Excavation and the Association of Biblical Research. It was November 17, 2008, where he writes this great essay on why Mount Paran is the same as Mount Hermon.
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in mind, because we know that the Watchers descended on Mount Hermon, which is actually a mountain range with the highest peak being called Mount Hermon. Mm-hmm. So they came from Mount Hermon. His glory covered the heaven. His praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise, and a plague went before him.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what happened when we came into South America and when we came into the American Indian colonies.
Mm-hmm.
A plague went before us. I have always wondered, when these beings came down and set foot on the earth, if they did not bring what we would have normally brought, which is every virus and bacteria that inhabits us, and a plague went before them. So then we get to Deuteronomy. The Lord came from Mount Sinai, dawned over them from Seir. Seir is a mountain range that's between the Dead Sea and Akbar, and he shone forth from Mount Paran. So there's Hermon and Paran again.
Mm-hmm.
And so these guys picked the highest peak of the area, and they came down and they established. What we have to understand is they'd been there for a while. People miss that. The watchers had been assigned to monitor and record. We don't know how long they had been there, but I imagine they had dinked with our DNA since about, 200,000 years, BC. And we had become human beings, and then they saw this evolutionary process. And so the first thing that they did was they gave us writing. And Enoch was supposed to be the first person who learned to write. El was pretty pissed about that.
Yeah.
Because what he actually wanted was, he did not want us to be able to record at that particular point. It seemed like when they gave us metallurgy and medicine and all of these things, the first thing that we set about doing was recording not only our history, but also how to commit horrible acts. And he did not want that. He wanted everything to be generation to generation oral, so that we had limited growth over a slower period of time. And we probably were not ready for what they gave us until the Axial Age had occurred, which was our spiritual leap in evolution. So Enoch learned how to write, and he was beginning to write down all of the deeds of the angels. Enoch became Metatron. Metatron exists in my way of looking at it because the Jewish people could not figure out how flesh and blood could inhabit heaven. They couldn't get rid of their own scriptures. So when the scriptures say that Enoch was translated, taken up, then we have a man walking in heaven that was flesh and blood with nothing special. So he had to be at one time converted into an angel to be able to be there in their theology.
Mm-hmm.
Because we write things that force events to fit into our theology instead of changing our theology to the event. So Enoch became Metatron, and Metatron became the head angel. And in the end of the whole thing, in Enoch 3, he is called the Lesser Yahweh.
The Lesser Yahweh. Yeah. So you wonder, who is it that taught Enoch writing? And what would you say to people that say that Enoch, that one Enoch or any of the Enochs are a forgery? Obviously, you and I both know about, 2 Enoch and 3 Enoch are, obviously suspect because of the way that they're written. One of them sounding very much rabbinical writing, later rabbinical writing. So, but what would you say to people that think that these are forgeries? I don't believe there's any such thing as a forgery. Everything contains truth, especially when people are trying to lie to you.
Well, we can call 2nd and 3rd Enoch sequels. Mm-hmm. And they actually read like sequels, and sequels tend to get worse as the time goes on, and you have more sequels, and that's what happened to 2nd and 3rd Enoch. Is there truth in them? Yeah, sure, but you have to be really careful. 1st Enoch, well, that's put together in 3 or 4 stages. So do we think that Enoch actually wrote it? More than likely, it was a transmission that was oral over centuries. Mm-hmm. And then written down in his name. It was they call it a false writing, because the person who actually penned it wasn't actually the person who is claiming. But take, for example, the book of Hebrew, which if you're a Baptist, you attribute that to Paul.
Mm-hmm.
It ain't so, brother.
Yeah, no, it's just not. No, it's pretty remarkable how many people believe that he wrote it. Although I think that if anything, it was probably tweaked to make you think that he wrote it.
Yeah.
Everything, the way I kind of look at Paul, people here have heard me say it before, but when Paul kept talking about the thorn in his side, after I spend a whole lot of time reading Paul and then listening to people defend against what I talk about Christ's words, and they always can only refute anything that I say with Paul's words. I think, I lost you something here. I think that Paul was an operative.
Mm-hmm.
He might not have intended to be, but that thorn in his side to me sounded a whole lot like a Roman spear.
Yeah, Paul, not to get too far off the subject, but Paul hijacked Christianity.
Yeah.
He actually did. He came in, and the inheritor was supposed to be James. James was already in the mother church in Jerusalem. James had his ways of doing things. That it was a Jewish sect, and it followed that. And Paul actually just invited in. He created his theology.
Mm-hmm.
Before Paul, there was no Trinity. The Trinity exists only in Constantine's head, because he had to bring everybody together.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't any talk about Jesus dying for our sin before Paul. Paul's the one who actually created that one, because he was looking backwards. He was going, well, let's see, we don't sacrifice anymore because this one guy was the perfect sacrifice, and therefore we don't have to sacrifice again. And therefore he must have been perfect, and therefore he must have been the Son of God, and everything kind of went backwards in Paul's mind toward the propitiation. But before Paul, that was something that wasn't considered. Jesus was the Messiah. He was the Son of God. But the idea that we would not be personally responsible for our actions did not really occur until Paul.
Mm-hmm.
James was really arguing against it. Well, Paul threw open all the doors to the Gentiles against everyone's wishes, and literally suffocated the church in paganism. And there you have it.
Yeah, well, that's why the saying goes, robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yes.
Yeah, that's where that comes from. Peter was robbed to pay Paul, folks. So when you pick up a book and it's a Pauline document, you pretty well understand where that's coming from. However, like I said, that he couldn't have written some of the most beautiful spiritual truths he had he not murdered all of the people prior to that and gathered all of these beautiful spiritual truths from the actual followers of the way. Of course, there are some amazing truths about that he speaks of, but then at the same time, almost in the same breath and in the same line, then he sticks you the governmental hammer in there. Romans 13 being one of the things that you can point to, but also him speaking about authorities. He clearly, like I said, had that thorn in his side that was telling him to make sure the authorities are in charge, and that God's kind of a side note.
Yeah, if you want to know Christianity before that era, read a book called The Didache, and it pretty well puts Christianity in the light before the Pauline structure took completely over.
Great, I will definitely do that. If you could send me a link to that on Amazon, that'd be wonderful. I'll be able to share it with everybody else as well.
Absolutely.
So you were talking earlier. Let's go into a little bit about. First of all, I want to ask a question, kind of specifically about what your thoughts are on, because the Bible speaks of two Enochs. I don't necessarily know what their or have come to any conclusion as to who these two Enochs were, but do you have anything that you've kind of applied to these two pieces of Enoch? Obviously, the Enoch from one Enoch is the son of Jared.
The second Enoch is actually Enosh, and you have these really bad translations that'll put it as Enoch if you're not really careful. And he was the son of Seth. Now Seth, that's another interesting biblical personage. But anyway, yeah, Enosh or Enoch,
Yep.
the son of Seth.
So when you think about Enoch, who was Enoch? So I think that this is the question that I first had. So Enoch, do you believe that he was genetically influenced by these El, or where did he come from? Or was he actually just a man that didn't have any of that manipulation? Kind of like how people would assume that Noah was clean as well.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I really don't have an answer. Just a hint of kind of intuition. I don't think he was genetically manipulated personally, but I think his line was. Does that make sense?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have back 200,000 years, but we really only pick up with Adam. So it looks to me like that lineage was genetically tampered with, which is our lineage. Mm-hmm. If you look at how everything kind of coalesced, you had several subspecies that weren't doing much of anything, and then all of a sudden, boom, overnight we take over and everybody else goes away. So yes, that I think is also backed up because when the Watchers came, one of the first things they taught us was genetic manipulation. There's absolutely no reason for that. There's no reason that we should know that except that they were doing it. You don't teach things that you weren't doing. And so we had people teaching us armament and metallurgy and medicine. Now, of course, we go off and we use it incorrectly. The very first thing that we did when we learned about medicine, according to the book of Jasher, is that we made a concoction that was a birth control concoction. And it says that we did that because we didn't want our women to look anything less than beautiful.
Less than perfect, yeah. And I find that amazing is that all these kind of modern understandings within the book of Enoch, like a birth control pill, in the book of Enoch. Also, the funny thing is also in the Old Testament, I always have to laugh because I always ask pastors, I ask them, I say, when they're talking about the Bible, I go, how come I've never heard you talk about these people in the Bible that have members that are the size of donkeys that have an issue like that of a horse?
Right.
They're like, what? I'm like, no, really. This is porno Bible here. So
yeah, it is. It's in the Old Testament, and then it occurs again in these writings. So if you
want to know where hung like a horse came from, folks, that's where it came from. It actually came from the Bible.
Yes, it did. If your people really want a good overview of what's going on in that time, they should read First Enoch, Jubilees, and Jasher. Mm-hmm. Now, I would read First Enoch. Pardon me. There's one that came out that puts the book of. Let's see if I have it here. Maybe I don't. I don't. There's a book that I put out that takes the book of giants and puts it back in the book of Enoch. And so you have both of those because a lot of us think that the book of giants at one time was supplemental. And so we just plug it back in. And it gives you an incredible overview. For example, we wonder who these men of renown are, and we're pretty sure that they're demigods. They're the fallen ones, the half-breeds. In the middle of the book of giants, we have the name Gilgamesh called out.
Who's 2/3 divine. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, he's 2/3 divine.
It's fascinating to me that you're reading all of these names of the actual Nephilim and giants and men of renown, and then you have Gilgamesh. Now, the question is, religions cross-pollinate. We see it in Romans and Greek mythologies all the time. Mm-hmm. So the question is always, who informed whom?
Mm-hmm.
So did the Book of Giants and the Gilgamesh there, who says, I have so much strength that I could defeat any army of any men, but I cannot stand against the warriors of God who are coming.
Yes.
And he's having these nightmares that they're coming, and they are coming, and they do subdue them. Is that informing the Babylonian myth, or is the Babylonian myth informing the oral tradition of Enoch?
Exactly. Is he actually talking about, so if he were to say, I can conquer any mortal man, but the heavenly ones, I can't match their power, is he being influenced by the books that say that the heavenly ones are powerful, or did he experience that?
Yeah.
Does he know who they are? Because he would have to know who they are. And it is remarkable that Gilgamesh being 2/3 divine, but also if you follow the Epic of Gilgamesh and these things, the evidence of genetic manipulation is there also. In fact, cloning even, because Gilgamesh has Enkidu, right? That is created to be kind of his duplicate.
His counterpart.
Yeah, to keep him in line, but it's also made from him, so it's a very unique kind of character. In fact, it's almost robotic. So hyper-intelligence or artificial intelligent being that is created to shadow him through these texts. I always find the ancient texts far more like science fiction, and these texts are, thousands upon thousands of years old, but yet they sound like sci-fi.
Yeah, they truly do.
Yeah, when you read the ancient cuneiform, it doesn't matter which translation. I don't care if somebody go, oh, well, Sitchin's translation. I don't care whose translation. It's all sci-fi, right? You got spaceships going through space, and they're fueling water from water on different planets. And, sorry, but you can't really get away from that, people. These folks were traveling through universes.
So knowing what the society is, these guys came down and they understand our society. They're, very intelligent. And so one of the first things they do is they gather the patriarchs and they make a contract with them.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. So this is a Phoenician inscription that was found around 800 or from about 800 BCE. And it says, the Eternal One made a covenant oath with us. Ashtaroth, that's the wife of God, has made a pact with us. And all the sons of El and the great council of all the holy ones with oaths of heaven and ancient earth. That's fascinating to me, that they came down and they go, okay, we're going to be your God. We're going to take care of you. We're going to teach you agriculture. We're going to teach you all of these things. And you're going to do this and this and this for us. Is it a deal? Sign here.
Mm-hmm. Well, essentially, that to me is this Adam story.
Yeah.
Right. And just really quick, I'm looking in. I just had to find it here quickly, and it's on page 32, where it's speaking of what the angels taught men. I wondered if you ever thought about this, where it says, and the angels taught them charms and spells and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. The cutting of roots to me, the mere fact that plants comes after the comma and that, the cutting of roots to me, I saw immediately as DNA manipulation, the cutting of DNA molecules that would change you or make different variations, that the cutting of roots, although the plant came after that, but with that comma, but I saw that cutting of roots as being DNA manipulation.
At the very least, it is our ability to take a plant, cut it, put another plant on top of it,
and make a hybrid.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It is. If it's DNA or it's hybridization through the cutting, doesn't really make any difference, because we've already been told in another passage that they were manipulating DNA. Now they say animals and men, and that, according to Jasher, was one of the reasons that God said, and this is El, threw up his hands and said, "I've had enough." Why? Because the whole thing, from start to finish, has been a DNA experiment. And the Watchers screwed it up.
Yes, so no question.
What did he do? He took the only family he could find whose DNA was fairly consistent with what he wanted, and he wiped out everybody else and began again. And that was Noah.
Yeah. Well, I think Jeffrey Epstein was trying to accomplish something similar with that, with this little sex farm, figuring when the world goes, I'll have this little place out here in the desert, and I will have had 500 children. There's some really sick things going on out there.
Absolutely.
So so for those coming in new, I'm with Joseph Lumpkin, who is this gentleman here. This book here, I will actually be putting a link, and folks, I'll put a link into Amazon right now so you can go and I'll put this link in the chat box. Oops, hold on here 1 second. And so you can go pick up that book. There it is. It is a wonderful read. So I wanted to get in a couple other things before we jump out of that. We can come back to Enoch, but I'm sure all of this has something to do, because I'd like to know a little bit more about the axial age that you were speaking of, but also just to help the people, because I believe that right now we're experiencing something here in the world where, they say the Watchers are going to return. Quite honestly, I don't think they've actually left. I think everybody has been present, whether or not where they're at under Antarctica. I'm not sure where they are, but I believe that they're here because the energy force creating that pedophilia, I believe, has something to do with it. But when you talk about what is going on and what when we are speaking about what is happening cosmologically, our ionosphere, what is happening with weather patterns, we're in deep trouble. But as a ham operator, what has changed for you as a ham radio operator that absolutely proves to you that these things are taking place?
Wow, we're really changing gears.
Yeah, I just think that it's going to be, this is important because it actually fits right in with the.
It does. It really does. Okay, so we have 11.5-year solar cycle, but on top of that cycle, we have this longer cycle that's about 400 years. That's called the Maunder minimum. The last time the Maunder minimum happened, we didn't have any sunspots for a while. It changed the weather pattern, and we had a mini ice age. And in the time of Shakespeare, we're told that the cow froze in the bucket between the barn and the house. It was very cold, and that of course gave way to the plague in that area of time. As we became more and more cold, people huddled together. We have these small houses, lots and lots of rats and mice, and the plague occurred because of the bacteria on the fleas, on the mouse and rat in the house, and so on and so forth. We are now at or approaching a Maunder minimum again. We have two things happening that are coincidental, and we can't figure out which is worse and what's really happening. We have the HARP project that has been screwing up the atmosphere for many years. And as a ham radio operator, we saw that even if it wasn't the Maunder minimum, we weren't able to talk the way that we normally would. The ionosphere was being just sucked dry. It was being used. And we couldn't get from one side of the planet to the next. In 1980s, I could talk to Korea on 10 watts and a good antenna. And now I don't hear them at all. They're not there. So our ability to communicate naturally on the planet has been disrupted. So we have two things going on, and that is the HARP project that is heating up and artificially contorting the atmosphere and the ionosphere. And then we have this Maunder minimum. If the Maunder minimum was supposed to have brought about another ice age, tough luck, the government got to our planet before it did. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's beyond my pay grade. But as a ham radio operator, we watch solar weather every day. And we've just been watching this thing go down and down and down. You have froze.
Looks like we froze up here a little bit. Yeah, let's give it a second to come back. I'm not sure what's going on. We get these gremlins. My channel gets attacked quite often and shadow banned and all sorts of stuff. So whenever you talk about this subject matter, but So that's interesting. So what you're saying is that the ionosphere is the ham radio operator's dream, that you get to basically bounce radio waves and use the ionosphere as a kind of a connection, a solid connection, although it looks like and feels like a radio wave, but it actually kind of connects through the ionosphere and draws energy from that. But today, that energy is gone.
Yeah, look at the ionosphere to a radio wave like a mirror to a light. All energy transmitted is photonic. It's just a matter of what frequency it is and what energy level it is. So everything that goes out is photonic. We can just see part of it, and we can't see the other part. So the ionosphere, when it's active, acts like a mirror, and it reflects it from one side of the planet to the next. We might get 2 or 3 bounces. Now, we're lucky to make it into Europe occasionally.
Yeah, that says a whole lot about if the ionosphere is weakening, well, that would probably explain some of the compositions of gases that we have that are combining and making very volatile situations. It would also explain the heat. It could also explain the warming that people are talking to, and instead of calling it, they can say it's man-caused, but they're probably the ones causing it that believe
Yes.
it's man-caused.
Yeah.
It's certainly not coming from you or I, right? We're not destroying the ionosphere.
No, my fellow ham radio operators that were actually around the HARP project said that they were creating auras of their own. That's how powerful it was.
Yeah, so that's HARP is what we're talking about. So creating aurora borealis on their own.
Yes,
The
huge amounts of energy.
That's huge amounts of energy. We're talking, a billion plus watts at one single station, possibly even more. I would say we probably couldn't even really measure what they're putting out there today in HARP, and they certainly are doing it. They've admitted it. So, yeah, that's amazing. So, we were talking about earlier the Earth being saved up for fire, considering that those gases are combining and turning our atmosphere into sulfur. Just sounds like that one little trigger of HARP can make revelation come to fruition that the world is saved up for fire. So, anyone for a barbecue?
We do these things and we think we have it all figured out, but the chaos theory always wins. So when I was with the Hypersonic Missile Technology Project, we thought we had everything figured out. We were with the hit the missile with a missile, hit the bullet with a bullet project. And so it came our first test, and we fired from the Marshall Island chain. And we got up and we saw the incoming missile that we were going to track, and we kicked in the scramjet. And we're looking out with an infrared camera pointed at the incoming object so that we can identify what it is and where we're going to intercept it. So we vector out. And when we fired the steering jet, a vortex occurred, just like on an 18-wheeler in fog. You could see the vortex occur on the steering jet toward the front of the missile. And it wrapped around to the infrared camera, and it blinded itself with its own exhaust, and it lost track of where it was and what it was chasing, and it blew itself up. Now we fixed that, but when we fixed it, it's probably going to be another problem. Well, I'm not there anymore because that project got tanked, but it gives you an idea of how we think we have everything figured out. And the moment we test it, everybody goes, oh,
wait, I didn't intend that to happen. Sure.
Yeah, remember when we crashed that probe into Mars?
Mm-hmm.
We fired the retros after it hit the planet. And the reason was because we were doing everything off of feet and miles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had a partner in Europe doing everything off of kilometers. They didn't reconvert. They forgot. They got the number. They thought it was the proper conversion. They plugged it in, and we crashed that ship. Stuff happens because we're just not that smart.
No, we think we are. That's the problem. we just think we know everything.
I worked with a group of scientists that were just phenomenal human beings, and the thing that made them so phenomenal is that they always assumed they didn't have all the information. And,
you kind of have to do that in the field that we're in right now. Obviously, we don't have the information. I'm getting texts from people telling me the Book of Enoch is a forgery and it's a distraction for this day, and so I basically just responded and said, well, that means that the Essenes were from the Dead Sea Scrolls fame were involved in the conspiracy today as well. That they wanted to drop it off with us right now, so we would be having this conversation.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Everything, and there are a lot of copies of Enoch found in the scrolls and in the Ethiopic scriptures. I think I need to kind of jump off here just a second and discuss DNA, if you'll give me just a moment.
Yeah, I would love to hear that. We were going to get back to that, and also I wanted to get to the Didache book that you were speaking about, and I wanted to post a link to that, so I'll try to find that. I just want to get the correct spelling of it.
So,
but you wanted to go with the DNA. Sorry.
No, I'm just trying to gather my thoughts. When the scientists that are coding the DNA ran into the problem of data storage,
mm-hmm.
Which was fairly expensive, and it takes a lot to store a DNA code. They said to themselves, "I wonder if we can encode memory in DNA." So in 2011, these scientists got together and they figured out how they were going to sequence DNA into let's call it a pseudo-binary pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Because we only have 4 different elements in the DNA. So they figured out if you go from A to B, it's going to be a 1. If you go to B to C, it's going to be a 0, so on and so forth. And they encoded this stuff. And then they did an experiment, and they encoded part of Shakespeare's work, small video, a couple of other things, packaged it up, tiny little drop of DNA because it's all molecular, sent it to the other side of the nation. Other scientists were given the decoding process. They did it, they played it back, and it worked. So I ask you this. Yeah, I ask you this. 95% of our DNA is trash DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say 90% of our DNA is trash DNA. That is a huge amount, an incredible amount of space. It would hold, well, let me give it to you this way. Everything that we have ever written, everything that we've ever done can be recorded on a piece of DNA the size of a small truck bed and stored ad infinitum. So carried inside of us, when we are advanced enough, may be the code for the people who actually came before us. It could be we may be carrying in our DNA a library.
Mm-hmm.
Just speculation. There you go.
But see, this is the kind of thing that I've always talked about, Joseph.
Oh, you froze again.
But we are, hold on, let me see. My connection came.
There you go. You are back
here. Yeah. So the remarkable thing is I've talked about the Akashic record, but I've also talked about that that when I take Christ's words where Christ said the Father judges no one, he's reserved that for the Son, and yet he said that we're all sons. So I thought, what a more amazing thing. Who would be a better judge of me than me? When I was revealed the truth, I'm going to judge myself. You will judge yourself. That's the karma debt, so to speak, that we know what we've done. It doesn't matter what we think or what we've convinced people that we've done. We know it. We know everything about ourselves. You know everything about yourself. That record is permanent. It is written on your DNA. When I've said that these things, these new truths that I have are written on me, they're part of me. We do change our DNA. That is we do actually, and we can change our DNA. I believe that we can actually turn things on and off. We're reduced down to this this robotic state, that we're using such a tiny fraction of our mind, and as you point out, a tiny fraction of our own DNA, that if you could flip all those switches, well, then the Incredible Hulk doesn't seem so unlikely.
No, I think we are the record. I think that we truly, literally are the record. Mm-hmm. And every one of us is writing into that record as we live. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, but see, that from a little tiny child is something that I always felt when I ever heard that God sees and hears and knows everything and he's going to judge you. I'd be like, looking, who's this guy? And then one day I actually realized, well, God knows everything I've done because I know it. Like, if I know everything I've done, well, then certainly he knows. Mm-hmm. So then it just I began to realize, well, maybe I'm the one actually keeping the record for him, like a secretary. What did you do today?
Yeah, I think that you're right. Let me see if I can pull up this link before we have. Okay, I can talk and type at the same time, so go ahead.
All righty. So, yeah, the remarkable thing is, as far as the Akashic record goes, and this is what I also mean, is that not only would we also be a record for ourselves, and a record that my DNA contains the record for you. If you're also part of me, that everything that I've done, you'll end up knowing what I've done as well, that when time compresses, that we're going to know everything we've done. We won't be able to hide it. And how this came about is, one day I heard, as loud as myself talking, that I heard, Derek, you won't be thrown into the lake of fire like you've been taught. You'll jump. And I thought to myself, why would I ever jump? And then the response that I got was, because when you know who I am, you will never allow yourself to stand next to me carrying what you carry. Mm. And so that began to make sense with me from a spiritual perspective of seeking or repentance. What is repentance? Turning away, throwing it away, starting new. This isn't my fault, right? I didn't come here. I didn't ask to be brought to this place, or maybe I have. But whatever the case, I am certainly a record of that, and I have to get rid of that. So the consciousness became very evident to me that was critically important. And if the consciousness is that important, again, Einstein pointing out that consciousness is energy, and energy is neither created nor destroyed. That means that my consciousness lives for eternity. So I better make absolute certain that I'm going to clean that up before I make the final exit.
I had to preach a funeral for an atheist not long ago. He was a good friend of mine, and his wife, who is a devout Methodist, called me up and said, I think only you can do this. So I quoted a lot of Einstein, and one of the things he said, and I'll paraphrase, and your watchers will have to forgive me if I mess it up too much. Time is an illusion, mm-hmm. although a somewhat stubborn one. I am sure that I will meet my friend again. I am sure of it. Mm-hmm. The book that you're looking for is called The Didache, that's Didache, The Teachings of the 12 Apostles, A Different Faith, A Different Salvation.
Got it. All right, so I will put this up. The Teaching of the 12 Apostles I've got, the Didache. I'll find it, everybody, and come back to this description after I find the exact book, and I will post that in the description of this video in case you want that. I'll be reading it and most likely review it right here with all of you.
Yeah, it just gives a glimpse of Christianity before the Pauline structure set in completely.
Yeah, and I think that's very important for people to understand, and that's why, Malia and I have another channel called Red Letter Disciples, and so we really just focus on specifically the words which apply to so many things. Christ's words are far, far different than what you're going to get walking into an evangelical church today. They'll give a few key phrases like, Jesus is the character logo of the church, and then they teach you Paul. Yeah, it's really disgusting. But we're at just a little over our hour point that we discussed, Joseph. But I wanted to make sure that I think that we can. I would love very much if we go through that. If I can, from my subscribers, get very specific questions, because I know many of you guys have read through this And also, I wanted to talk quickly, if we could, about your new book, the translation of the Book of Thomas. And but I'd like to be able to, to talk to you more about not just this book, but your other books, and particularly the Gospel of Thomas. Tell me about how that project started for you and what you're doing with that and what you found within the Gospel of Thomas that left a mark on you.
The Gospel of Thomas is really not a gospel. It's 114 sayings, and but it's entitled the Gospel of Thomas. So Thomas, we know, went to the Middle East. He established churches there, and you can kind of see the influence when he wrote his gospel. They are 114 sayings directly taken or supposedly directly taken from Jesus. The thing that fascinated me is that they tend to follow the Q document. And if you recall, Q informed Mark, and Mark informed Matthew and Luke.
Mm-hmm.
Gospel of John's a different story. It came out of what was called the Signs Gospel, or the Signs Proto-Gospel. So Q is a proto-gospel, and I believe that Mark is a proto-gospel. But Mark approaches things from a very different viewpoint because it's not influenced. It was, let's say, it was kept away from the church and away from reinterpretation. It hasn't experienced the drift, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Like, take the Gospel of Mark, for example. We don't even know what the ending of Mark is supposed to be because the last page of Mark was apparently destroyed. We don't know quite how, but we know that the last page was destroyed. Why do we know this? Because you get to a point back in what they call the witnesses, the codices, and all of a sudden you have 4 endings that we can find of Mark. That doesn't happen unless it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have them picking up snakes and drinking poison and all of these very dramatic things. And those did not exist in the original. Probably in the original, we find them simply walking off into the sunset to proselytize and convert and spread the word. That's what it looks like. The doxology that we love so much, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever, does not exist in the older witnesses. People got really upset when the NIV came out and a lot of these things were missing. They thought that they had taken them out of the Bible. In actuality, the King James in the Textus Receptus, actually the lineage that led up to that codex added all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Not the same person. A person would add this and add that. So the Gospel of Thomas gets us back to what could have been, and I believe is, one of the older witnesses of what Jesus probably actually said. Now, I believe it was suppressed and then forgotten and then left alone, not to drift, because one of the things he says is a group of people cannot make you a god. It takes one to make you a god, a singularity.
Mm-hmm.
It is an indictment against the Jewish church at the time, an indictment against the Sadducees and Pharisees. And it says, if someone tells you that the kingdom is above you, the birds will get there before you. Mm-hmm. If someone tells you it is below you, the fish are already there. But I tell you, the kingdom is inside of you and outside, and you have to seek it. And a lot of the way that it's written is fairly gnostic in nature, mm-hmm. Simply because he says that you have to come to the knowledge of the truth, not just the faith of it.
Yeah.
You have to be brought into the knowledge of the truth. And you do that by a transmission from the Spirit. And that's not up to the church to open and close the doors of heaven. So, it was left out.
Yeah, it's certainly not the church's job, but boy, that doesn't help them very much. It's kind of hard to have a control mechanism and control the populace while freeing them at the same time. That's quite the trick.
Yeah, and Gospel of Thomas frees them.
Yeah, how do we, and this is how I always help people identify. I say if a religion is trying to control you and separate you from everybody else or from other people in the world, there isn't any gospel in it. That isn't good news, folks. Good news isn't a separation between a people. That's not good news. Good news is, how do we come together? How do we love? How do we recognize each other as the same as us? So anybody this is my entire problem with organized religion, is that it was obviously established to, although I believe that there's good people that think they're doing the right thing, but Jesus addressed that by saying, look, these people will kill you and think they were doing the work of God. Mm-hmm. So, he gave us every degree, every element, every bit of understanding we would need to be able to face these types of truths, particularly during this time.
So one of the things inside the Gospel of Thomas is this idea of a singularity within the person. Jung called that individuation. Mm-hmm. The ability to take your inside and your outside, your conscious and your subconscious, your desires and your actions, and bring them into harmony and focus. And he got this idea from Gnosticism. As a matter of fact, he was so enamored with Gnosticism and the fact that he saw within it the archetypes and the possibility of let's call it psychological health through their ideas, that he actually tracked down one of the only at that time, one of the only copies of a codex of the Gospel of Thomas, and it's called the Jung Codex. So I used a lot of that in the last book, and a lot of Jung's concepts that he took from it, and the idea of making your male and female, your inside and outside, mm-hmm. your actions and your thoughts and your desires in harmony frees up so much emotional, mental, and psychic energy that you can accomplish amazing things if you're not at odds with yourself. So there you have the Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah, and also, I think what I also got from the Gospel of Thomas is starting to read Christ's words in the scriptures quite a bit differently as to what he intended to say. Yeah. And so, because the statements are the same. Now, you mentioned the Q document, and for folks out there that have been following QAnon and been obsessed with QAnon and politics and the deep state and all of that, that's why he calls himself Q. That it's kind of the Q is the source for all of the information. So there was a Q document, and many people believe that that the Book of Thomas was the Q document that the other writers of the Gospels had used in order to provide the statements of Jesus for the Gospels and accurately tell the story. Just to give some background on that. And go ahead.
No, this also goes back, this idea of combining and evolving books and religion goes back to the Pentateuch, because we know that there was a Yahwist, an Elohist, a redactor. We know that there are all of these people who are putting into the Pentateuch, and so we know that there were at least 4 different people who contributed and wrote this thing. If you look at the Genesis, it has 2 creation stories right there, one after the other. Why would you do that? Well, the redactor simply did not manage to or choose to combine them. And when you look, one is in a very male, give me the facts, give me the data kind of thing, and the other is written in almost a female voice of and description. It's very interesting when you start to take it apart and look at the different parts of it.
Yeah, and when you get into these ancient texts, the one thing that I learned reading the earlier versions of the Pentateuch and then also reading the Sumerian texts, obviously the stories were plagiarized one way or the other, and retold and completely, changed names. But so when you mention the redactors, it's quite remarkable that the Torah itself and these books seem to be a highly compressed version with alterations of names of the Sumerian texts.
Yeah, I think that you can probably draw a pretty straight line between. I just lost my train of thought as to what Hammurabi.
Hammurabi, yep.
The Code of Hammurabi, and the Ten Commandments. I mean, there's a fairly straight line there, and he came first.
Yeah,
he was before that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, these things came before this period of time that everybody thinks happened. These are reiterations of previous stories.
We're running way over, but
Yep.
do you care?
I don't know.
Okay, so one of the last things I'd like to get to before you have any questions that you know, or your viewers, is the Axial Age.
Yes, and viewers, just this is a good time to put your questions in all caps. If you have any questions for Joseph or myself, put them in all caps right now, and I'll try to go through those. But yeah, I definitely want to talk about the Axial Age.
Yeah, and to your viewers, I don't claim to know much of anything. I'm just a researcher by nature. So if I say I'm sorry, I can't answer that, please just take it as a grain of salt, that I'm not going to embarrass myself by giving you some BS. Okay, Perfect. So Karl Jaspers was a German psychologist and philosopher, and in 1949 he came up with this idea. Okay, so up until this point, and this is going to frame, this is actually, if you follow this, it actually frames the problem of the world right now. This is going to frame the division in the world as we see it. If you kind of follow this, this is one of my kind of pet projects, is to trying to figure out why people are doing what they're doing. The Actual Age actually says that there is a shift, an evolution, a jump, a leap, a spark in human, I want to say psychology, but that's not it. Let's just call it spirituality. That's a better word for it. Up until this time, every religion in the world was external. They did sacrifice. They tried to figure out what the gods were wanting. They put their daughters and sons in the fire. They did all kinds of things. They sacrificed themselves out of existence. It was a bloody, nasty place where humans were trying to second guess the gods and do horrible things in their name. Then, somewhere around 800 BC, everything changed in an evolutionary blink of an eye. And we are literally talking about 600 years. That's it. Mm-hmm. And if you stretch it, maybe 800 years, but that's it. All of a sudden, overnight, everywhere in the world, these men began to wake up and enunciate the spiritual evolution. You had Lao-Tzu, you had Buddha, you had Zoroaster, you had all of these great men who all of a sudden stood up all over the planet and said, wait, spirituality is inside, not outside. Mm-hmm. It is about the inner journey, not the outer journey. It's about you, not everybody else. It's about how God is in you and not you trying to figure out what he's doing in the world. Before then, it was a bloody mess. Now, what we actually have on this planet is a delineation between people who are post and pre-axial age. There are still people sacrificing animals. There are still people cutting the throats of goats and sheep and whatever. There are still people who are trying to go to war because your God's not the same name as my God, or you're worshiping in a different way. The pre-axial age. Post-axial age human beings are, okay, I'm going to discover this God on the inside of me. You discovered on the inside of you. We're not going to pay particular attention to the names, because inside, in the mystical concept, there is no landscape. There is no terminology that fits that experience. Mm-hmm. So we become an internal individual path that is post-axial age. I think that in the world today, the division that we are seeing in wars and violence between nations and between humans can be tracked to a thought pattern that is pre or post axial.
That's interesting. So basically, what you're saying is that these ages, that the age can begin from call it a consciousness awakening that changes, say, our DNA globally, and certain people stand up and say exactly what that is because it's now part of their conscious state rather than not part of their state of thinking at all. They actually think it. That's actually what's taking place today, is that there is an awakening, something that jarred people, and they know something different right now. And
I patiently await the second axial age. It is the only thing that's going to save us.
Mm-hmm. That would make that makes a lot of sense. I think that there's probably, you say first and second axial age, but it seems to me that that this may happen in different stages. Now, I think that in 2012 something definitely took place. I don't think that the Mayans spent all that time with the intricate math that they actually have, which is far superior to anything that we have today. Talking about the end of that age, I think that they actually understood that was an end of something else. People, it's the end of the world. Well, ultimately, it could be the beginning of the end of the world if it is a massive shift in consciousness, which would obviously then bring upon apocalyptic revealings that changes things.
Yes.
So, but it seems like that there are these quickenings, these stages of our consciousness that would be considered an axial age, or maybe an axial, you call it a blip, right? The age might be this massive spike, but we keep having these little blips of release of this new information that seems to help people. And I do believe that if we don't have a massive awakening of consciousness by a large group of the people on Earth, then it's over.
Yeah.
I mean,
totally
there is no fixing what we have right now. So there isn't any amount of governments. There isn't. You've got a couple different situations. So this is why calamity seems to be so popular, or fear mongering, like people fearmonger. But the reality is this: it's kind of like our debt system. We want to discuss our financial situation in this country alone. We have, $23.4 trillion in stated debt. We have close to $200 trillion in unfunded and unstated liabilities. The Earth itself has more debt to private centralized banks and the Bank of International Settlements in Sweden that exceed all value of anything on planet Earth. So I'm not quite sure how you can pay that back. The only way to fix that is to blow up the whole system and start from scratch, which is exactly what will happen.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where mankind is becoming from a moral state as well. We are morally bankrupt by and large, in the same way that our monetary system is value bankrupt. It never had any value, right? It's a faith-based system.
Yes.
Backed by the full faith and credit, right?
Mm-hmm.
of us. So we are at a situation now in the world that if we can't collectively upgrade our conscious state, then the Earth gets what has to happen to it. It has to go. There isn't any way to recover it. We're too far gone. And in fact, Malia and I were discussing this. We don't even believe that we can comprehend just how broken we are.
No, we can't.
No.
There's a Zen koan that says an eye cannot see itself.
Yes. And a knife can't cut itself.
That's right. Beasts do not know their own strength, and men don't know their own weaknesses.
Yeah, and we don't know. It's kind of like having you here on the show, Joseph, is that your influence, and even though you were assembling other books, but your commentary in this made a huge impact on me. And obviously, the impact on me, I end up making this channel. I have an impact on 60,000 people, and those 60,000 people have an impact. So you can't say that you haven't had an impact on people, because here's my subscribership. You're part of that.
I appreciate that.
So yeah, that's what we all have to begin to recognize, is that Christ saying, "Love thy brother as thyself." That's because you are him and he is you. It's not love him as much as you love yourself, because otherwise you have a license to hate everybody because you're unhappy with yourself.
That's so right. Yes.
You know, it's no, love him as though he is you. You know, be merciful to him as you would you when, you know, you screw up. You want to say, hey, be gentle on me. So all of these things, you know, that's where the work is inside, and, you know, the kingdom is within. So what you're saying is exactly what these sages during the Axial Age and the second Axial Age, if we say that that's coming up, I believe that that's taking place, and changed and altered with the twinkling of an eye is precisely what that means.
Yeah, you'll, as the Buddhists say, meditate for 1,000 years to be enlightened in a single moment. And
exactly.
I don't know. I don't know how long you want to go. I have already managed to cancel my next appointment.
Oh, well, you know what? We'll wrap this up because we'll have lots to talk about, and I'm sure that, you know, as I'm going to be going back over your version of the Gospel of Thomas, and we'll have more to talk about. And anything, you know, just consider this place a platform. You ever have anything you want to say, you just let me know, and we'll start up a show, and we can talk about anything that you saw. There's no shortage of appetite for people wanting knowledge out here, and I'm sure that you'll see when you watch back and watch all of the comments. There's some very, very engaged folks here. We've 618 live now. We've had higher than that at any given point in time.
Well, I hope I have left them with something to think about, even if they don't agree with me. But I will leave you with one comment, which is out of the new book. There it is.
Oh, very nice.
And it's number 70, and it says, Jesus said, if you bring forth what is within you, it will save you. If you do not have it within you to bring forth, that which you lack will destroy you. So,
well, there's a comment right there. What you lack will destroy you.
Yes.
Well, that's remarkable. I'm going to leave you folks with that, but I want to first of all say thank you to you, Joseph, but tell everybody how they can find, you know, do you have a website that you have, or you're publishing, or where the books are? Just type in your name in Amazon. How would people find?
Yeah. fifthestatepub.com, apocryphalbooks.org. And I always get them confused. I never have anything to do with my own website. I'm just a researcher. So let me make sure that I've given you that right. Yes, apocryphalbooks.org will get you to the newer website, which appears to be more friendly to your cell phones, your smartphones.
Oh, good. Well, that's terrific. Yeah, no, I've taken up already more of your time than we agreed to. So we're about an hour and a half into this. Joseph, I just wanted to say thank you. And as I said, open invitation. Anytime you want to come and talk, there's something that stirs you, and I'll send you some ideas as we go. And if it's something that you want to discuss, you're always welcome back, and we'll have you on here. And you write something new and want to talk about that, come on.
Well, I appreciate it. I have been invited to the Travel Channel in a couple of weeks to do something called Restored. We're looking at multispectral analysis of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We're finding actually texts underneath the text. Mm-hmm. And because if you have parchment that you need to reuse, and your friend has a book that you have a copy of, then you might want to obliterate something that you've got and copy his. So we're 99% sure that we're going to be finding new text out there really soon.
New text from underneath the text that's already there.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. Can't wait to see that. Yeah. All right. Well, Joseph, I appreciate you, and everybody, all of the family here in Global Witness. I want to thank you all for supporting this channel. You're always, your generosity amazes me. I appreciate you. Malia, appreciate you. And we will see you very, very soon. Thank you, Joseph, for joining me here. If you just stick around a minute so I can say goodbye to you personally, I'll stop the stream here. Love you all out there very much, and we'll talk to you very soon.